Good evening. I wanted to see if I can finish up my video that I started yesterday, which was the hand tools that a new woodworker should start off with. So I think yesterday I ended the last thing, not just hand tools, tools in general. To correct myself, I think I ended up with an electric drill driver. So I'll jump right in. Next thing, the next tool is probably a 10-inch saw, like a back saw like this here. This is a Spear and Jackson that I use. I actually use this for a fair amount. This was given to me years back. It was my first real back saw that I had, and I recommend this over a like here for example, my this is my Lee Nielsen dovetail saw here. It's an excellent tool. Fairly specialized though, and not necessarily inexpensive either. They're not, believe it or not, Lee Nielsen's known for having tools that are, certainly not cheap. Their tools are fairly pricey. I hate to even use that word pricey. That they're not inexpensive. That's probably the best way to put it. But a saw like this, even this is a pretty good size too. I don't know what the TPI on this one is. It doesn't have it on the plate. Sometimes it does. But the point being, this saw here is you can use it for cross cutting. You can use it for rip cutting in the sense that you're cutting your tendons or your dovetail joints or your box joints if you're going to do those. It will work for both. This is filed for cross cut, but it will do both. And in theory, a saw like this brand, there's other brands. Lynx, I believe, is another really good brand. They'll last you for forever. This will be a lifetime tool, and they're generally in the $100 or less range. And unless you get really specialized, like this, my dovetail saw there from Lee Nielsen. Once again, I'll say it again, an excellent tool, an excellent value for the money. But I could have gotten away without using it. I'm stuck with this and have been fine. There's really no need to go out and go nuts, but don't go getting something dirt cheap either, because a tool like this, as I said, it's not too expensive, but it will last you the rest of your life with just reasonable care. Where yesterday I suggested for your panel saw an inexpensive Stanley, like a 24-inch, I guess the size they come in, the typical one that has the induction hardened teeth. They're filed for both rip and cross cut. That tool doesn't need to cost a lot of money. I think those saws run about $35 or so, and they are more than capable of handling a lot of different shop tasks. You don't need to go out and buy a $125 panel saw, because it's really what I would call a rough carpentry tool. You're generally using that to rip boards, the cross cut boards that you're going to be shoring up later with your finer tools. This here is more of a finish tool. You're cutting tendons with it. You're cutting dovetails. You're cutting tendon shoulders. Things that are going to be seen. So you do want to spend a little bit more money on those, and get yourself what I would call a lifetime tool. Then the next tool I'll suggest here, once again, I've talked about this ad nauseum. Here, your typical number 4, plane. I highly recommend looking for a Stanley, because they're everywhere. You don't want a number 4, number 5. A number 5 will generally do everything a number 4 can do in most regards. That especially that a new woodworker will use it for, and then a little bit more, as in you can begin to use this as a joiner. You can edge joint boards, narrower boards, and turn them into or thinner stock and turn it into wider stock, and that is an important task. Both planes, you should be able to get either one of these planes are in pretty good order for under $75 or under. They're going to require some work. Usually, obviously, you're going to have to sharpen the irons, this goes without saying, but usually you're going to be removing some rust, probably cleaning up your handles, and that's really up to you how far you want to go with that. And for this here, I really I went to town on the knob and the handle, and I got them to where they look brand new. On this plane, and the backstory behind this plane, it was used at Bethlehem Steel Company, huge corporation that during World War II they made, everything you can think of, battleships. The USS New Jersey was made at the plant that is not really far from where I live, and the original owner of this plane worked there for a time when he graduated from high school, just as World War II was starting, and like a lot of guys, he ended up joining the military, but he went back there after the war and worked there for the rest of his life as a pattern maker. But he this tool was from his son. Gave this to a coworker of mine who gave it to me, and I restored it. And I probably talked about that before, but I did not want to make this tool look brand new. I actually had planned on giving it back to the guy, but he didn't want it, and I wish he would have taken it, to be honest. But going off on a little bit of a sidebar there, these tools here, you will, I've said many times about the difference between buying new and restoring. I'm still on the fence in a lot of ways about that, because I'll say it again, a brand new woodworker who is getting into using hand tools especially may not have the experience necessary to take a tool that is beat up and turn it into a working plane, like a working tool like this plane here. There's dozens of videos out there, some written, and I'm all for the written word. Trust me, I have more books than I have an embarrassing number of books, to be honest. But in the case of restoring tools, it's so visual that really I think videos are the way to go. You could possibly learn how to restore a hand plane by watching it. You can certainly learn all of the steps you need to take. Whether or not you're going to get that tool working is another matter. I leave that up to you to decide. I certainly am not going to recommend a new woodworker go out and spend $400 or $350 or $400 on a premium hand plane. Not in today's climate. I mean, great part about that is you're getting a tool that is really top of the line, works right out of the box. You don't even need to sharpen them in a lot of cases. Of course, you'll probably want to, but you don't necessarily have to. And they will last for if you reasonably take care of that tool, it's going to last you forever. Bad news is you're spending a lot of money on a hobby that maybe you'll find out isn't for you. So good news about these, inexpensive. You can find them all over the place. You might even have somebody willing to give you one. Generally less than $75. Bad news is you're going to have to put some time into restoring it, which could be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. And if you're not very experienced, you might run into a few pitfalls that aren't easily fixed, or you might not easily even recognize them. So that's really, I don't want to take it any farther than that. That's, if you're a new woodworker watching this, maybe that's something you want to research and watch some videos, watch some guys who really know their stuff when it comes to restoring, and maybe make a judgment call from there. Um, the next tool I recommend is going to be really unusual in the sense that you don't see this a lot, but this is a bullnose rabbet plane. Um, this is a Craftsman that was very likely made by Stanley. I forgive me, I don't remember the number of the Stanley. Um, I want to say it was the number 78. If I'm wrong, and you're watching this, and you please correct me, if you like, if you care to leave a comment. Usually the 78, they're identical to these. They have an adjustment lever on here, adjusting that will adjust the iron up and down. On this Craftsman here, it's a little bit more of a bare bones version of that same plane. You have to adjust the iron with I use a hammer, like a plane hammer, and tap it. But these perform the all important task of making rabbets. And a rabbet is if you're not familiar, I'm sure most of you are, but this is a bad board, but that would be a rabbet. This is a beat up piece of poplar that I was messing with my shop made router plane there. But with this plane, a plane such as this, I should say. Now, before I go on, let me tell you that these are very inexpensive. You can get, they're usually $30. I've never 50 guaranteed if I went for $50 or less, on eBay or most auction sites, stuff like that. Only thing you want to watch for is you want to make sure all the parts are there. Main parts are going to have your lever cap, your iron, your fence, and your depth stop here. This is the one area where I found that a lot of these planes seem to be missing the depth stops. I've had literally half a dozen of these that people gave to me, and the one I wish I did have a Stanley 78 that it just needed some work, and I ended up like sort of cleaning it up and giving it away. I wish I had kept that one and gave this one away, but this was, I think, the second one I got. It was the first one I got that had all the parts, and I got it working, and it worked so well, I just never considered getting more or replacing it with an actual Stanley. Like I said, this is probably made by Stanley, just branded for Craftsman. But and also if I didn't mention the fence, and most importantly too, your little knicker, if you can see that, this little knicker wheel, to store your rabbet, so you don't get blowout on the end of the joint when you're making it. But with this tool here, you can begin to make bigger furniture, drawers, bookcases, things like that. A rabbet joint is a perfectly strong joint for a lot of furniture. Don't let anybody tell you any differently, especially when you couple it with nails, glue. You can really make you can make a house full of furniture with rabbet joints. Of course, as you progress, you'll probably start using more traditional dovetail joints. A rabbet joint is a newer joint in furniture making. Of course, they've been around a long time, but they're more modern than other joints, I would say, but perfectly acceptable. Part B is these planes can be used. You can remove this fence quite easily and use this plane for other things, adding chamfers, even hogging off material if you want. they're pretty versatile, and they're really inexpensive. Like I said, $30. I've seen. I went on eBay a few days back. And I saw, type in bullnose rabbit plane, and you'll see dozens of these things come up, um, in the $30 range. I didn't see one of more than 50, and it's a great tool to have. You'll be surprised on how often you go to this if you're making furniture by hand. If you're using a table saw more than hand tools, you can obviously use your table saw to make those joints. Um, this is pretty much as fast. It, the one thing it isn't is they do require a little bit of control. They are not accuracy isn't like a lot of hand tools. Accuracy isn't necessarily guaranteed. They do have fences. They do have a depth stop, but it does require a little bit of practice to use it. You're not going to be using this thing right off the bat. So I would highly recommend, like anything, you practice with it before you put it to your final wood and decide that you're going to make something out of it. Here is a this is an antique Philister plane, similar in function to this plane. The rabbit plane here. Um, this is one of my favorite tools. Even though it is a specialized tool, it's more specialized than this rabbit plane. The the main these work just as well if you can get it restored properly. Um, the main drawback with these is I've I've really unfortunately haven't come across one. This is the second one I've had. Um, the first one I had, it was so beat up. I got it. Thankfully, I paid very little for it, and it was beyond my skill to fix. It just was really in rough shape. This one here, um, when I got it, I ordered it off of a vendor from an internet vendor. I had contacted him about getting one and told him what I wanted, and perhaps it was maybe 3-4 weeks later he got back to me, and he had a few options. This is the one I went with. It was in pretty good shape when I got it. I did clean it. Um, I had to do a little bit of work on the bottom fence here. It was it had just a touch of a bow, which really doesn't affect the functioning as long as the sole was flat, which it was thankfully in pretty good shape. The one issue I had with it though, the iron was really really beat up. It took me about 5 or 6 sessions to where I got the iron to retain an edge. It was rolling really bad, and thankfully I just happened to be on I think Twitter of all places, and one of the guys that was following me, I was following him. He mentioned grinding it back really far, and he said his theory was, and probably correct, that somebody ground it. They ground it probably with a power grinder, as I've talked about before, and they ruined the steel at the front of the iron. So his suggestion was grinding it back to get to better steel, which I did, and it worked. But it took quite a while to really, because I did it all by hand, and it was a lot of work to get this thing up and running again. But once I did it, it does function great. And here again, it's sadly a tool I don't use very much anymore because, like I've told you people many times, I don't make really large furniture anymore. Um, but the drawback with these is, one in decent shape. I'm not even going to tell you great shape. One in decent shape is probably going to cost you over $100, maybe more. There are companies that still make them. They're um, in a traditional style like that, and they're very expensive. They're $400 to $500. This tool here is probably going to cost you less than $50. I can guarantee you it's going to cost you less than $50. Um, I didn't. I didn't know. I hesitated with this block plane because you can certainly get away with not having a block plane. This will actually do some of the things that a block plane can do, such as cleaning up. A great use for a block plane, for example, is if you're making a small box, you're making a small bookcase, even a larger bookcase, you want to true up. You have your boards datoed in. You have one that's sticking out a little bit. You want to true it up. A block plane, because you can hold it in one hand, makes it easy to have good control while you're flushing up your boards. But is it completely necessary? Absolutely not. I love block planes, but when you're first getting going, you don't really need one to build furniture. Certainly can't hurt owning one. They're a good, handy tool to have around. I will say this: I would definitely buy new. This is the Lee Nielsen. I think is 16.5. Modeled after the Stanley 16.5. I've had Stanley 16.5s, several of them that I worked on. They're generally not. A block plane's no more difficult or easy to restore than a number 4 plane, a typical bench plane. But what I've discovered with most of these block planes that I've come across that are reasonably priced, they're pretty beat up, and probably that's because that's the nature of the tool. Block planes weren't traditionally used by furniture makers, more so than they were by carpenters, who obviously carpenters are going to have those planes on in their tool pouch and working on construction sites and whatnot, and those tools just took a beating. Everyone I've ever come across, at least, has been pretty badly. It looked pretty rough. Let's just put it that way. And a lot of times the irons on them were really in rough shape or ground down. They had been sharpened so many times. Probably the carpenters using them. A lot of times you'll use a block plane to put a bull nose on a sill or something like that, and you hit a nail, so you're grinding back the iron and things like that. So I would highly recommend buying a new one, because even from Lee Nielsen, they're not really that bad in terms of cost for the quality you're getting. I want to say they cost about $140. Once again, I could be wrong. Forgive me if I am. But these are excellent tools in terms of construction use. I honestly say that this is one of the best in terms of its construction, its ease of use, everything like that. It's one of the best tools I own in any regard. I'm talking electrical, mechanical. This is really top flight tool. That all being said, you don't necessarily need to have one. If you do, if you do want one, I'd recommend, and you want it for fine woodworking, I'd recommend buying one of these. I wouldn't buy, Stanley used to make, and Craftsman for that matter, used to make a decent block plane that you could get at a hardware store or whatnot. And they were usually in the $30 range, $35. They were okay. But they had adjustment issues. The irons on it, I did have one for years as I carried an inexpensive one around as an electrician. A lot of times you cut it through stud base where you'd blow out. I just use it to clean up the blowout when you're going through it with a big auger bit, just to make it look a little better. And I would use a block plane for that. They were fine for that. I tried to use that one time too. I was truing up the top of a pretty large bookcase I made. The Craftsman saw one, and it made things worse, not better, which is what really made me go out and get this. And as I said, I've tried to restore them. I've really not come across a 16.5 that was reasonably priced, that was restorable. Most of them are beat to hell. A lot of the tool collectors usually buy up the good ones, so they're pretty rare on the market to find one that you can get for a decent price that you can fix. We can talk about marking gauges and things like that. Certainly important tools, but you can get away without a marking gauge from the beginning. A combination square and a decent marking knife will serve. And of course, you're going to need a tape measure of some kind. For me, you don't really need anything larger than a 12 foot. I don't like something like this, which once again is like a job site tool, is almost useless in a workshop. It's too big. You're better off going with one of these this Stanley anniversary roller, the 175. They're inexpensive. They're under $20, and they're perfect for your typical furniture projects. There's wood rules. I have here, once again, this is more from my electrical days. I like this because the little brass lever could go into, when you were measuring the depth of like when you're connecting EMT into a box, and your EMT connectors, I always like to measure the depth of them when I was cutting the pipe. Don't really need this for woodworking. I actually would steer you away from one of these. They can be used. They're fine, but if you really want to have a wood rule, I would suggest more something like this guy here. One of these foldable 2-footers. You can get these vintage or new. I have a couple of vintage ones that I came across. That thankfully I was able to get them for dirt cheap, like as in next to nothing, and they work just fine. I keep one in my actually I keep one in my tool bag, just in case, and one I use up in my office actually. Whenever I need a roller, I grab that one. Really, there's other things, a workbench. That's a whole nother ball of wax there. I'll say this: I've shown my bench before on this channel. It's modeled after several different benches. It's not really modeled after one bench. The famous Roubeau bench. It sort of has a little bit of that. It has definitely the Aldell's Carpenter book. Was another something where I got ideas to build when I built this bench. All that being said, I really like this bench. It's a good solid bench. I've had it for more than 10 years now. If I were beginning over, if I was building a brand new workbench from scratch, I would go with, if you've ever seen the Paul Sellers bench, or is it some writers refer to it as an English workbench or a Nicholson workbench. The defining trait on those is you'll see a nice wide front apron, and back apron for that matter. You don't necessarily need to put a back apron on it, in particular if your bench is going up against a wall like mine is. But doing that will add stability to the bench. But those benches, what I really like about them is the clamping versatility of them. You can use those benches without a vise, and you could certainly add a vise later on. And the reason that is so important is because workbench vices are expensive. A good one is going to cost you more than $100 even on the used market. Well over $100 probably. I would estimate that to get a good workbench vise is probably, including shipping, going to be in the $150 to $200 range. You can certainly find them cheaper, but that is really, in my opinion, throwing money away, because you will outgrow it quickly if you continue. If you get a smaller vise, you're going to want a vise. You're only going to want to buy one vise, put it that way, and don't buy a cheap one. You'll be more frustrated than anything else. In my case, I have see if I can show you guys this. I think I've seen it before. This is a leg vise. These do a lot of things that a that a regular bench vise will do and more, but they do have drawbacks as well. Drawback one is working on the face of a board. This vise, I have it so it will, you could clamp about a board about 9 inches wide, and 9 inches in width like that. You can make them so they'll clamp a board wider. It all depends on the parallel guide you add to your vise. But in terms of being able to work on the edges and the end grain, this vise will do. This vise will do anything that a regular traditional vise will do. It's very, very solid. I could literally pull this bench over using this as a lever. The bad news is there is a parallel guide. I'll see if you guys can forgive my camera right here. You can see where it looks like almost like a screwdriver sticking out. That guide isn't really functioning as a lever, and the lever is set to the width of the board you're trying to clamp. In this position here, you can clamp up to about a 1-inch wide board with no problem, maybe even 1.5 inches. But anything larger than that, you're gonna have to move the lever out to make up for the added width. That is one issue that a lot of people don't enjoy, especially like if you're working on a project that has a lot of different width boards, then it might become a little bit of a hassle. But I've never found that to be the case generally. Really good news about leg vices, they're very inexpensive. The hardware for the screw for a leg vice, they cost, I think I paid $30 for mine. I got it from Lee Valley, and maybe we're going back a few years, but maybe they're $50 today. Maybe a little bit more, a little less, but that's going to still be a quarter of the cost of a traditional face vise. And you can make the chop. Really, you can make that out of. I made mine out of construction lumber. It was just a typical 1x. It was a 1x. I think it was a 1x8 I used, and it served me very well for quite a few years now. So I would highly recommend going, looking at videos, getting some books on if you're going to build a workbench, because it's a topic that is very, there's so many different opinions out there. I don't really know where to start. Other things like a bench hook, you can make one of these with scrap wood basically. When I was woodworking a lot, making a lot of furniture, I would go through one of these a year. This one's a few years old now. Shooting boards, that's another one. Shooting board might be, it's going to sound a little funny. I actually don't have a shooting board at the moment. Unfortunately, I had one. I made mine out of melamine. Once again, I'd suggest looking up some videos on those. And unfortunately, I keep it on a shelf over in the corner of my garage, and just so happened that the line from our ice maker got a leak into it and didn't realize it, and it leaked all over the board and kind of bubbled it all up. So I haven't replaced it as of yet. You could sort of use these as like a quick shooting board. It's not really ideal, but it does work in a pinch. But if you're working all by hand, if you don't have a table saw where you can sort of guarantee that your crosscuts are going to be square, you're probably going to have to get a shooting board at some point, or build one yourself. You can buy them. They're not, from what I gather, they're not cheap when you buy them made. There's certain makers that make them. Really, the last, there's myriad squares and knives and all kinds of other things like that. I'm trying to really touch on the very basic tools that you're going to need to start building your first projects, and I think I've really touched on all of them. In general, you'll of course I've talked about sharpening equipment before, sharpening stones. New woodworker, I'd really recommend an India stone, to be honest, or a good oil stone. Water stones are great. Um, they're probably, to me, the easiest stones to use. They cut quickly. They sharpen and polish. Problem there is you do have to flatten them. You have to. They require a lot more maintenance. So you're going to have to buy some flattening medium. Um, so a basic water stone setup like I have, an 800 grit and 8,000 grit, a flattening medium, that's about $200. You can get an India stone for $35 or $40 that will get your tools sharp. And you go with a strop that I've shown on my other videos, and that will pretty much keep you up and running for a while. And India stones require a lot less maintenance. The last tool I want to talk about is one of these little, if you want to call it a grooving plane. This is a record 043 or 043, if you want to call it that. I would recommend going for the 044. It has a larger handle, and it's larger, it's easier to hold. This tool here, I've said before, I don't have giant, the Boston Strangler hands, but my hands are not small, and this tool is not the easiest tool for me to hold. I can hold it, but it's sort of like a kind of a weird grip that I have to use to keep this thing steady. The 044s or the 044s are a little bit more ergonomic. They have a larger handle. They are easier to control, and they're not a whole lot more than these. You can find them on the internet for I'm going to say they're running around $100 in good shape. But these are going to allow you to make grooves up to, I believe they come with up to a 1/2 inch wide blade. And there's others. I want to say you can get more blades for those and increase their capacity and all that. But that's going to allow you to make grooves for drawer bottoms, backs of cases, things like that. If you're going that grooves for boxes, things of that nature, you can certainly do those with a saw, a back saw. You can make grooves with a back saw like this. It's a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more exacting. A tool like this does make it easier, but I would recommend going with the 044. I have here, before I go, I'll bore you a little bit more. The 044 sort of looks like this here. This is an 050. This is very similar to 044. It has an additional fence, and what it does, there are here. You can see these. There's beating irons and whatnot for them. It's sort of like a multi-tool, like the Stanley Universal planes that have been out for a long time. But an 044 will look like this, so you can see that it's much easier to grip. The only issue is they're going to be more money. They're more money than this. This will certainly work just fine. I actually just used this not too long ago. There's still some shavings in it. I'm kind of ashamed of myself there. But it's just, they're not, I find it a little difficult to use. I never could seem to find a nice, comfortable grip on it. So that's why if your hands are a little bit smaller or a little bit more nimble, maybe this won't bother you so much. For me, I feel like I'm murdering the thing every time I use it. So yeah, as I said, there's certainly other tools that it's endless, really. It's hundreds of different things, thousands that we could get into, but I was just trying to stick to the basics, the things that you're going to need, that we're going to get you started, so you can begin making furniture, making your first projects. And that's actually another thing I'm going to touch on. I'll do that in another video, is what should be your first projects. I have a really good idea that I've written about on my blog before, but I think it's worth bringing up again. Um, and maybe hopefully I'll find some time later on this week or over the weekend, and I'll do a video on that. I wanted to keep this video under 30 minutes. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen. I knew that, because I didn't want to make this a three-part series, just because if I know myself, I wouldn't watch three parts on on picking hand tools or your woodworking tools. So um, that's why I sort of went a little bit over my time frame. The first video was about 25 minutes. I was hoping to get this to about 30, but fortunately it wasn't going to happen. But yeah, I think this list here, I didn't, I should have added up the totals, in price, I mean, of what all the tools I've shown over the past two videos. I'm going to guess to say that it was in the $500 range. Once again, you don't need all of these tools to begin with. The main thing I would say, you get yourself a panel saw. If you're working by hand, if you're not using a table saw, if you don't already have a table saw, a back saw like this, a couple chisels, a mallet, a knife, tape measure, a square, and a plane, a number 4 or a number 5, and you just start making things right from there. The other things you can add on as needed as you're growing your collection and you're making a little bit more complicated furniture. But these things, the tools I showed over the past two videos, I think if you got them, you could pretty much build most of your typical home woodworker, your new to intermediate projects. I think you could pretty much get most of them built with those tools. Then you might you start getting a little bit more complicated, getting a coping saw, maybe a spoke sheave. But starting off, you're probably going to be sticking with more square, and you're not going to be dealing with curved work as of yet. And that's something I'll touch on later. But for now, I think I hope that this was a good base, and it helped if you're new and you're in the market, you're thinking about taking this hobby up. I hope this was helpful and helps you make some good decisions. So thanks for watching. You have a great night.